Okay, we're on lesson 192, Workbook of A Course in Miracles. I have a function God would have me fill. And I was just sitting here thinking about this lesson, contemplating, I don't know what you really want to call it. Trying to, always I'm asking, okay, what can I say? What should I say? What needs to be said? Not so as that I do the other lesson, do the lessons for people, because there's a great discovery in each lesson waiting for each and every one of you, to help you personally along on your way to exactly what this lesson is pointing to, having a function God would have me fill. And obviously, what made me laugh prior to my starting lesson was the whole idea of God's will and function, and just so in a world of space and time, obviously we have to unlearn everything we've come to know to recognize that my will and God's will are one will. And of course, we're always being when there's talk of the Holy Spirit in the text itself, and in the lessons is always mentioning of our little willingness combined with the great willingness of the Holy Spirit, or of God, of reality. And although there's some interesting sentences in this lesson. Creation cannot be conceived of in the world. It has no meaning here. Forgiveness is the closest it can come to earth. For being heaven-born, it has no form at all. So if I were, in talking about some of these things as I'm going to talk about right now, the idea of the little willingness that we have, that we join to the greater willingness, it's the same idea. There is but one will, and that will is God's and mine and yours. And when we are in alignment, we have enjoined ourselves to the will of God, and therefore when anything gets done, it gets done by the grace of God, because God's will is obviously greater than our own individual will, and it is our own individual will for separation that produces a dream wherein which forgiveness is required at all. So I'm just laughing at the idea when it says I have a function God would have me fill. Well, within the atonement, let's say, and this is much what we're speaking of, the atonement within the plan for salvation, we all have a function God would have me fill. And when we've healed our minds efficiently enough of our own denial of the fact that our will and God's will is one will, when we've healed our minds sufficiently and we begin to experience and recognize that our will is one, then we notice that it's always by the greater will or grace of God that everything happens not by our little will, and the only thing that ever happened by our little will was a dream of separation and death, which is what we're attempting to undo our thoughts of it being true by utilizing the lessons of the workbook of A Course in Miracles. So of course, if God has a function He would have me fill, and the only way I come to know what that function is by releasing myself from all the dictates that have occurred in the thought that my will and God's will are in fact separate. Then when we go to fill the function that God would have me fill, the recognition that comes with the experience of us having the function comes when our will is joined with God and we're getting a direct communication that is beyond space and time. And many of us get that in non-conceptually, and it helps us enlighten our concepts as to how we are supposed to go about fulfilling our will. But once we're joined with God's will and we recognize that it's one and the same, there's really no thought of self-congratulations as if I was able to do that. It was me being joined with God and greater will, as opposed to my little willingness that fulfills all things, because the greater will is the fulfillment of all things, being what creation actually is. It is your Father's holy will that you complete himself, and that yourself shall be his sacred Son, forever pure as he, of love created and in love preserved, extending love, creating in its name, forever one with God and with yourself. Yet what can such a function mean within a world of envy, hatred, and attack? Because all of those things are based on the idea that our wills are separate and the inequality is our reality, rather than the fact that we are perfect, whole, and what love is, and created without any lack. So therefore, there's nothing to be envious of. And how would you hate what is yourself if yourself is only love, and love is the substance and sustenance of total reality, which you cannot not be part of. And the only way attack, of course, is possible if you think there's something outside of you that's different from you and separate from you, and not merely that, but you think you have things that you need to protect because you value so much that they're worthy of your expenditure of energy to prove who you are. Whereas the Course is saying the proof of who you are is in your willingness to give of what you are freely, and allow all things to be given to you through the will of God. And this lesson just about sums up the entire Course and what it is we're attempting to do. We're undoing our mind of the thoughts that cause us to think of ourselves as anything but God created us to be. We're eliminating our mind and hearts of fear having any validity in terms of who we know ourselves to be, and in terms of what we're here to accomplish. And of course, salvation is really only our accomplishment here, but it happens in a particular way. And the tool is forgiveness, so forgiveness must be learned. And forgiveness is the same action of mind that finally is your own creative reality, your mind. And I don't know how, we used to talk about it at the Academy as an action of mind. Forgiveness is an action of mind that opens you to the light of who you are, rather than closes you and causes those experiences of you thinking you need to defend, you thinking you need, there's something to be envious of or jealous of, you thinking that there's something other that it's possible to hate. Forgiveness is the opening which allows our mind to see ourselves or experience ourselves right here where we are, in the same way, with the same action of mind that we will eventually remember is how we created in reality, but with all the veils and all the limitation, all the parameters that allow perception to occur. And yet what this lesson is saying is that it's quite necessary, since we have undergone this experience of separation, which resulted in this world, an illusory world, a dream of space and time, and the undoing is the healing of our mind and the purification of all the thoughts that allow it to exist in the first place. Then it's necessary that we have a function here and fulfill in order for everyone to get back into that same, into the same creative modality, wherein which we initially remembered not to laugh at that tiny mad idea, and effectively made a world of space and time wherein which we could experience a different will whatsoever. So of course there's nothing in the world that resembles heaven whatsoever, being 100% opposite, and yet the mind which projected it can begin to project, and this is what it's saying, a counter dream to the dream of death, and we can still utilize the form because we're no longer invested in the form. We're invested in the ways of salvation and the recognition of our reality as not being in this world of space and time. This is so, and I think this lesson goes a long way to put together the entire function. The fact that we need forgiveness to undo that which we have imposed upon ourselves, that has hidden from us God's will and taken from us, in a sense, we've given it away, the ability to have the power to fulfill our function and to hear that voice. We're being offered back the entire that for the purpose of not necessarily escaping the world of space and time as if we're going to leave here immediately, but being within the world for a function that helps all come to the realization of the fact that they're saved and creation is their reality, so as to have no one left at all. So this accounts for what many of us who have gone beyond space and time and recognize our reality as being whole, perfect, true, light, and love, and the non-existence of this dream, when you find yourself back here wondering what you did wrong, this lesson offers you the ability to, instead of concentrating your thinking on what it is you did wrong that resulted in you being back here, what it is now you can do to undo that which you thought was wrong and has kept you from a permanent return to an infinite reality where in which your own eternal nature assures you the fact that it cannot change, and you never actually left except for that nano incident, and just they call it a tiny tick of time in the course, in the text, and the talk has yet to occur. That's how short, if you can get an idea, if you want an idea of duration, how long the dream was capable of lasting before the correction corrected it entirely so it never was. I mean, it happened in such a short period of time, in a short temporal sequence, that in the tiny tick there wasn't even a chance of the talk to occur yet. So nothing was ever really missed in reality, and yet, due to the nature of this dream being the opposite of reality in every way, look at how much of our time and energy and thought has gone into what it is we think we have missed. Obviously, if your reality is eternal and changeless, infinite, and of one and only love, then you could never miss it, even if for a second you lost track of where that communication was in your own mind. The minute it was restored, it would be right back to what it always was, always will be, and could only have been in the instant of thinking you missed it anyway. The mind, without the body, cannot make mistakes. It cannot think that it will die, nor be prey to merciless attack. Anger becomes impossible, and where is terror then? What fears could still assail those who have lost the source of all attack, the core of anguish, and the seat of fear? Only forgiveness can relieve the mind of thinking that the body is its home. Only forgiveness can restore the peace that God intends for His Holy Son. Only forgiveness can persuade the Son to look again upon His own holiness. So forgiveness obviously is the other lesson when we're back around to now a lesson that's offering us more explanation of what the everything is that we receive, because forgiveness offers everything I want. This is a more expanded version of the everything that you do want and the everything that you actually have, that forgiveness is allowing you to get glimpses of. And when you get those glimpses of, because of the nature of what forgiveness is, there is no time when it wasn't. And yet there seems to be an interval of time in which we need forgiveness, and this lesson goes a long way to help us understand what it is and how this actually is occurring. and what our function is and how the function is fulfilled. Of course, it's fulfilled by the grace of God and God's will, because when we join our little willingness to the greater willingness, we're part of the totality of willingness that is God's will, and you wouldn't claim it your own when you know, in fact, and on the own humility of your own experience now, that while you're part of the totality of the oneness of that reality, you're not all of that alone, because being alone and having other things that are that but are not joined with you is what the problem seems to be here in space and time. With anger gone, you will indeed perceive that for Christ's vision and the gift of sight, no sacrifice was asked, of course not. How can you give up what was never real? You used to just have a problem in recognizing the unreality of what it is you think you can give up. Because only that which you could give up could be unreal. You couldn't possibly give up the eternal, whole, perfect, infinite, abundant reality that is your source and which you cannot be separate from. How could that be true? The words that we use to discuss it eliminate the ability for it to ever have been possible. Sometimes you just need to listen, even to your own words. Read this out loud. Listen, and you'll see, you'll begin to experience alignments with the words and the meaning that'll be useful to you. Read this out loud to yourself. Read it in a mirror. Read it to other people. When you read these things and pay attention to what you're reading, you will begin to see that this is just true. The meaning that you've been looking for has already been within you. And by learning to listen to the words that you're reading, you learn to unlock the meaning that's always been there. It's an inside job in that sense. Yet, do we need forgiveness to perceive that this is so? Without its kindly light, we grope in darkness, using reason but to justify our rage and our attack, instead of using reason to justify reality, and therefore recognizing even conceptually the inability for that thinking to have any validity, so therefore not it being untrue. Yet when we lose our value in that thinking, it can no longer have any value in our mind and our heart, so therefore cannot affect us. We won't be able to get the result of that thinking, because our mind can hold only what's valuable, and when it's no longer valuable, it just simply goes away. It's like hits the delete button, it's gone, it doesn't affect what you're doing any longer. Only pain was lifted from a sick and tortured mind. This is good stuff. So this is the entirety of what our mission is here, as a minister of God, as a teacher of God, as a student of A Course in Miracles, as someone who's made the decision that forgiveness offers me everything I want. Forgiveness is my way to God. Jesus says, the only way to God, and that's through forgiveness. That doesn't mean you have to learn A Course in Miracles. It means you have to learn what forgiveness is. And forgiveness is natural to a mind that's exhausted its possibilities that there's anything here it would want. It's natural because it's the same action of mind. This goes back to what we were talking about earlier. It's the same action of mind by which we create. We're restoring our mind to its original state within an illusory state until we can get used to it enough and trust it enough so as to no longer need the classroom that we utilize space and time to be in our fulfillment of our function, because God has one for us to fulfill. So you guys have a good day. It's Saturday. It's beautiful out here. And I'll see you soon.